fire is real low. We're trying to make some heat here. Okay. That line was closed down in 1938 and they were scrapping it, and this engine was set off to San Francisco to be cut up in little bitty pieces and remelted down and used over again in something else. However, it was noticed by a gentleman named Gerald Best, who was a rail historian and also worked at Warner Brothers Studios down in Hollywood. He knew they were looking for a locomotive, so Warner Brothers purchased this thing, and there it went, down to Hollywood for a career until about 1976 or 77. The first movie it was in was A Torrid Zone with Jimmy Cagney, Ann Sheridan, Andy Devine, and Pat O'Brien. The last feature film it was in was also John Wayne's last movie called The Shootist. With that, its movie career ended, as did John Wayne's. Anyhow, the locomotive was purchased by the old Tucson Corporation and moved out here to Henderson, Nevada for a place they were building called Old Vegas, which is a pretty neat place back in this day. It was on static display there. It didn't look anything like this. It was kind of rough looking actually, and had gobs of studio paint all over it. However, in 1985 there was a big fire that swept through the place. It burned the locomotive and a bunch of buildings there. And you can see some pictures of that fire, the devastation from the fire, in the photographs alongside the flat card. I happened to see the locomotive in 1986 and knew a bit of its history, and I figured, well, what the heck, if nobody else cared for it, maybe I could do something with it. So I take it to my home, literally, and restored it in my backyard. And it resides in a big shop now, you know, so it's not out in the elements all the time, just for events like this. But although it's not used in many films, we've used it in a lot of documentaries. We filmed with Ken Burns of PBS, Stephen Ives of PBS, the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, and outfits like that. To this day, you can still see her rolling across the small screen. Every so often I get calls on the phone saying that somebody's seen it. The last documentary we did was called Wild West Tech with Keith Carradine, which airs on the History Channel. Anyhow, there's only 3 of these locomotives that are left. One is in the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento. It's their centerpiece there. It's called the Sonoma. The other one is in the Smithsonian Institution back in Washington, D.C. It's called the Jupiter. And then there's Eureka here, which is the oldest of the 3, but the only one that's operational. Like I say, it's listed, however, on the National Historic Register. We would rather have it out running, doing what it's intended to do, rather than sitting stuffed and mounted in some museum. Now, even though we're doing short display runs here for all of you for the holidays, this locomotive does go every year to Colorado and run through the Rocky Mountains on the narrow gauge back there. So it's doing today what it's done since the day it was built. And that's out there serving the public and taking it through some areas. Okay. The way this track was built is typical for the 19th century. If you look over here, this rail is much bigger. It's 90-pound rail, that's 90 pound at the foot. It has tie plates underneath to protect the ties and things of that nature from heavy equipment rolling over. Narrow gauge track was quickly built, cheaply built, compared to standard gauge. That's why they were so popular in the 19th century, narrow gauge rails. Because they could get it up and make it revenue in a hurry. Well, as you can see, it's just the rails laid on the ties and spiked down. As the equipment got heavier, they could no longer do it this way. So they eventually started doing other techniques such as this. And if you go out on the main line today, you won't see these doing bars and everything. You'll see continuous welded rail. And the rail's like 134 pounds to the yard, much bigger. So anyhow, we'll head back to the other end and we'll see if we can find our way. We made it.